Welcome to Cosmic Compass, the leading astrocartography podcast where we talk all about locational astrology, predictive timing, and how to best align yourself in places you thrive. And in season 2 of the podcast, I am interviewing your favorite astrocartographers and astrologers. And in today's episode, I'm really excited to present to you Elliot Jay Tanzer. He is one of the first astrocartographers that I ever learned from. I actually learned from him in his book, Evaluating Astrocartography Maps. It's one of the first books I ever read on the topic of astrocartography. And his book is so helpful, especially if you're a beginner just getting started. And in today's episode, Elliot shares with us how he uses astrocartography, the tools, his tips, learning Jim Lewis's work, and also learning from him based on his travel stories and what's happened for him in the world. Before we get into today's episode, be sure to hit the subscribe button, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or even watching the visual version of this conversation on YouTube, Helena Woods Astrology. And be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Really means the world to me and encourages me to continue to show up and give you free content every single week. So thank you so much in advance. I don't post every single episode of the podcast on YouTube, mainly the interview series, but if you do want to follow more solo episodes, listen to more my travel time, story time vlogs in podcast format, you can listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts to get all of the episodes. All right, now it's time to present to you Elliot Jay Tanzer. Elliot Jay Tanzer. Elliot has been doing astrocartography for so long, and his book, Evaluating Astrocartography Maps, was one of the first books that I ever read and what initially got me so excited to get into this field. So I'm so honored to have you, Elliot, on the show.
Well, thank you, and I'm honored to have such a wonderful introduction. I was introduced to astrology back in 1968. I would say I kind of dabbled with 5 years maybe of doing charts, birth charts, but not really interpreting them, just the mathematics, which unfortunately I think a lot of younger astrologers are missing in their, I don't know, data bank. But yeah, we used to do logarithms and before I became a professional astrologer, I took a class for 4 days, over 4 weeks. And at the end of the 4 weeks, because I was going through a career change, I said to the astrologer, Carl Rolls, R-O-L-E-S, who I don't know if he's even still alive, what does it take to be a professional astrologer? And he said, get a business card and a typewriter. So without a business plan or any real knowledge, I said, that makes sense. Started using a microphone. First, I just typed up reports for my family or friends as a way of, practicing. And after, I'd say, 3 years of doing readings, I think I started doing readings. So the first 3 years was basically just personality studies. Your moon is here, the sun is there. But I was doing a trade with somebody for a massage trade. And when they were giving me the massage, she said to me, you really didn't tell me anything that I wanted to really know. And she laid out 3 things. What's my purpose in life? What's my karma? And, what do I have to see in terms of the rhythm of my destiny? Okay. So that put my mind to answering those 3 questions. Okay. I put up my shingle, professional astrologer. 1976 is when Jim Lewis designed the first map. And that was possible, even though it was kind of a conceptual idea for many years, but to do the mathematics of plotting out lines on a globe, and it was real brain power and hours of work. But then came personal computers. I read the manual that came with it, and Jim Lewis in the manual, on one little line at the bottom of page 4 or 5, says something about how many miles you should consider, about 250 miles. And he said that's about 1/4 of an inch on the map. Seemed pretty simple. Plus, he gave the interpretations. Okay. It wasn't until 1995, I think you were born a year later or a year earlier, that I found out that soon after he wrote the manual, he decided that was far too conservative, only 250 miles, and one should consider, and the key word here to me is always consider, up to 650 miles, 700 miles. Okay? It may not go that far, but consider it because you don't want to miss something important if it's relevant to the client. Right? Or as I do my readings, I'll measure it out as little less than a half an inch. Okay. And that little less than half an inch is considering that up to 3/8 of an inch or 500 miles, which some certified astrocartographers use as their limit. But it's got to be getting weaker and weaker, and you're getting further away. So it's getting at some point negligible, some point non-existent. And there's only one way really to know where the edge is, as much as we'd all like to be precise, and that's to drive or walk across that edge and go, I feel different. And I've had many clients give me feedback that that's pretty close to accurate, where someone might drive from, say, Northern California to Colorado, from their Saturn line to their Venus line, and somewhere in the Rocky Mountains know exactly where they suddenly feel like a burden's been lifted, a load has been lifting, and their stern and Saturn-looking face that I was born with, suddenly becomes soft again. Okay, and driving back, they can start to feel that. Now, I grew up on my Saturn line also, fortunately with Jupiter and the Moon, so I could say it was a great childhood in many ways. But the Saturn took its toll on my body in terms of not having a lot of fire in my chart. And someone with a lot of fire, Saturn might have displayed itself in their relationships and difficult parents and whatever. So, but for me, the Jupiter that I grew up on, I knew everybody. I was well liked and so forth. So I wasn't kind of the nerdy guy in the corner. But it takes someone like you to bring me out of my reclusiveness. I grew up in a big city, and as soon as I left, it was like, wow, there's a whole joy. And I went from Saturn, Jupiter, Moon, which meant it felt very much like home, to Venus. And suddenly I became romantic and I became creative and I joined a theater group. And so it's a whole different experience. But I would say it's not until 1995 that I realized that you have to consider wider, right? And where I'm living now is probably as wide as possible from Venus, more than 500 miles. That's still proves to me very accurate that even 650, 700 miles, you're right there. 750 miles also takes in consideration the possibility and likelihood that someone's birth time is slightly inaccurate. That shouldn't make much of a difference, except that edge is going to move slightly east or west. But if it's more than 5 or 10, especially 15 minutes, that's going to significantly change things. A half an inch to the west might have been now too far. A half an inch to the east might be bam, right in it. Okay. So if you're more earlier or later. Right? Also, some people are more sensitive to vibration. You've got Jupiter rising basically just above the horizon on the Placidus house system. So you're a Jupiter rising. And you're a diehard optimist and enthusiast and always see that there's a silver lining. So when I look at your map on my little mapping module, which doesn't give the parans, but your birth chart shows a lot of, I would think, challenges in the family. Yeah.
I grew up on the Moon MC line.
Yeah.
So the Moon MC line was the closest one. And then, yes, Jupiter was rising to the left of me.
Sorry, not Venus. Yes, Moon.
Yeah.
I meant to say Moon and Jupiter.
A lot of the relationship with my mom, for sure, growing up. That's that whole Moon story, yeah.
You have that quincunx to Venus and the Moon, and you have, I think it was Pluto square the Moon, right?
Yeah. Pluto, Moon, Paran there as well. So
Paran would echo your birth chart, my suspicion, that although you might have been happy and joyful at school or playing, when you get home, it's, let's call it functional, right? Okay.
I had to grow up really fast, for sure.
Emotional roller coaster. So that's a demonstration also that even though you're on Jupiter and the Moon, which is a wonderful combination, the Paran, especially Pluto and the Moon, or Pluto Venus, Pluto Mars, Saturn Venus, Saturn Mars, Saturn Moon, Saturn Sun, Pluto Sun, brings it way down. So on a scale of 1 to 10, Jupiter moon should be a 10. But then add the Paran, it brings you back under 6 or 5.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're bringing this up because so many people don't look at parents. They don't even consider them. A lot of people don't know about them.
Right.
You know, you see these huge TikTokers
Yeah.
and Instagrammers, and they're talking about astrocartography, and they have no idea what the
The
parents are.
Paran.
And
Yeah.
it's one of the biggest things.
Yeah. And for those who need translations, the line crossings, where two lines cross somewheres around the globe, but at that degree of latitude, and I'm doing mathematics on hard copy, it's about 1 degree above and below. But again, the word about. So it's actually, it bleeds over a little bit more than 1 degree. I think you specify specifically 60,
70 miles north and south.
50 miles or 70 miles, right? Okay. So that Paran rules that degree and 1 degree above it, below it, or a little bit more slightly. And that's going to determine a lot of, now, a favorable Paran, like say Jupiter and Venus, which I'd give a double check mark to, whereas the other ones I'd give a double X, really stay away from. But the double check is not going to make a living on Saturn or Pluto better, except incrementally, because living on Pluto, especially Pluto combined with another one like Mars, right, is going to really be so far down low that, yeah, there'll be some happy times. Okay. But otherwise, I would see those as being more like the Pluto lines as being an emotional roller coaster. When they're
Mm.
great. But when they ain't, they ain't. You know, it's real, because Pluto is, after all, the god of the underworld, and it's the only. And for any of the beginners or relatively new people to astrology, there's two ways that I was thinking to share to start your to get deeper into the meaning of these things. One is to read a book on the Greek mythology, and the one that I read when I was growing up was Edith Hamilton's book, Greek mythology. And that's where you learn that Mercury is the god of thieves, it's the god of merchants, it's the god of artisans, and it's the god of, and some people just think it's communication, right? But you can live on Mercury and should have all the benefits of a very positive influence. But if you're a thief or a con man, yeah, you'll be a smart ass, clever person who thinks they can get away with anything. So, so you still have to be conscientious of who we're talking to. Likewise, Venus could be great for someone like me with Saturn rising, takes me out of my shell with Cancer rising and a Pisces moon and a Pisces time of day. My sun signs in the 12th house. You know, I'm a reclusive, but put me on Venus brings me way out of that shell. Right? And if I had a pair like Pluto and Venus, however, or Mars, that might bring that location down. Okay. Now I happen to meet my wife on Venus. She's a Libra. Jupiter and the Moon, great. The Pluto Mars moves north or south of where you were, and it might change that whole scenario. Right? So
Yeah.
likewise, I met my wife on Venus, but I did have Saturn Venus Paran. She's a Capricorn rising. But when we came back from Hawaii, where we lived also for 10 years, I very carefully moved to south of that Venus Saturn Paran. And our love and affection has just continued to grow even deeper than when we were in the LA area.
So interesting that your wife is a Capricorn rising when you are a Cancer rising and you have Capricorn in the seventh
Yeah,
house.
yeah, yeah,
Fascinating.
yeah. See, she was living at the time on Sun, Mercury, Neptune, and Uranus. That's a big key in terms of astrocartography, is that what lines you're living on is going to be the kind of personality you're going to attract. And depending on your personal evolution, right? Earlier in her life, Neptune only attracted difficult connections, and Uranus, interesting people that were often in the music or other industries, producers or actors, as people who also think outside or live outside the box, right, creatively. As we move further away from her Neptune line, because she's always a meditator, but had pretty much a difficult time with substance abuse in her early years. But as we move further away, she became a practitioner of energy medicine, So she knows all the acupuncture points and kinesiology, and you know, which is great because now as I'm getting older, help, she's there.
One of the things I love about your book, Evaluating Astrocartography Maps, is the checkmark system that you have. It's been so helpful for me to learn astrocartography with the process of elimination. You know, shading out the areas visually in your head that might not be suitable with certain crossings. Like if you see a Pluto Mars, you know, astrocartography lines, you know, seeing that and noting, let's eliminate that as an option. And the check marks of 2 check marks or 2 X's. I just found that so helpful, especially as a beginner astrocartographer, like getting started. Like I didn't know, where do you start, you know?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I had hoped, anyway, I appreciate your feedback because I had hoped that the book and the DVD that came with it showing how I prep a map would be like a workshop in a book format, right? But it would have to be for someone who can follow many different steps. Too many lines, too much just, freak out. Okay. But when you do it on your software, do you use miles to determine, or do you use 8 inches, 8 degrees, 8 degrees?
I use miles.
Miles, yeah, because
Yeah.
that's basically that's the how my, let's call it, scientific justification for why 750 or 600 miles, because you're really dealing with 8 degrees in terms of the orb, and 8 degrees is pretty wide. Okay? The visual I always use is a solar eclipse. In other words, the path of totality isn't just the solar eclipse isn't just a line going across a country or continent. It's actually a path of totality. Okay? And once you get outside that path of totality, which is about 500 miles, then you're in a partial eclipse. So it's still strong. It's still a wow phenomena, but it's not as strong. Okay? And then
And do you use relocation charts as well
well,
when you are looking at?
maybe if I had more of a robust system like you do, where you can generate all this at once and kind of overlay them. I see the relocated natal chart, the astral locality, the geodetics as secondary approaches. Right? In other words,
Mm-hmm.
they can give you that refinement or fine tuning if you already have a couple of choices. But in many cases, because you're dealing with 650, 700 miles, someone's map may just give them, if they live, say, in the United States, just this one little location somewhere is in the middle of, a corridor maybe that goes straight down from Chicago to New Orleans. Parans might tell you where in Italy might be the sweet spot, and which ones might just have not such a great Paran, maybe Mercury and Neptune, or Mercury and Mars, which is nice to avoid if you could, I'd say. But life isn't going to be perfect anywhere. You still have to deal with your birth chart, but at least you can then zero in on the sweet spot. And I'm using that from tennis. I'm not a tennis player, but they tell me that you can hit the ball with the racket, or you can hit the sweet spot and place it. Okay? So that's why I think a
Mm-hmm.
sweet spot is a good metaphor. So if you only have one little area anyways, now if you had, say, France and Italy and maybe someplace else, a relocated natal chart might help zero in. But then you still have
Yeah.
personal preference. My preference is to live more rural. Your preference might be more urban, right? You may prefer the mountains. I may prefer the ocean. So why would I want to live in northern Italy if I want to be down at the ocean, swimming in the Italian Riviera? So
It's so important,
yeah,
that preference. A lot of people, you know, they'll come to me and they'll say, "Help, I'm desperate. I need to find a new place to live. Just tell me where to go and I'll go there." And I always say, "What do you want? What are your preferences? You know, do you want to live in the country or the city?" Because knowing that, it is really helpful. I mean, we can see where the best places in the world for you would be, but then you've got to choose that's best for you. And I think a lot of people want to give their power away to an astrocartographer or an astrologer who will just tell them
yeah,
their life and what to do. And it's like, I'm always trying to give the power back to the client to make their decision, you know?
exactly. And that's the wise thing to do. Plus, you have to realize, they have to realize too, that once they go to their, let's call it, area, which may be more than just a city or two cities within that area, besides the preference of where that's located, there's also possibility of where could they do their career, or and if they don't have a career consideration, then they have to trust that when they get there, they'll find their career, they'll find their niche.
Mm.
Okay? But even then, if you can find your area and you get there and you've never been there before, it still might take a year or two to gravitate. I like the word gravitate to that place that serves you best. What's the risk assessment? Okay? So, like the moon might be wonderful for certain people, if it's the only choice in terms of no combination like you had with Jupiter or I had with Jupiter. Um, but as long as it's not with Saturn or Pluto or Uranus, which can be pretty disruptive, or Neptune, which could be pretty schizophrenic, because Moon is emotions, Neptune has no boundaries, right? God of the ocean, no boundaries. So, yeah, you're losing your emotional mind. But for somebody who's very emotional and a caretaker type, an enabler, living on the moon may not be the best place. And the people who do live on the moon who are like that often give me feedback and say, I don't have a life of my own. I'm too busy taking care of everybody.
Yeah.
Whereas if I live on the moon, even though I'm a Cancer rising ruled by the moon, um, I have no problem changing diapers and washing dishes. And
Are there any astrocartography lines that you find people generally have the hardest time on?
well, definitely Pluto. Um, and not initially. Usually, if someone goes to vacation, you can go vacation pretty much on any line for a couple of weeks, maybe a month. But anyone who goes to Pluto initially will always feel that exuberance, that ecstatic energy. Right? I often think of for those who are familiar with Eastern iconography, Shiva dancing in the ring of fire. His one leg up in the air, and Shiva's dancing, right? So it's that ecstatic Kundalini, woo, vibrant life force, and
Ooh,
so
yeah.
ecstatic. Maybe the best eureka, the best idea, or the best sex ever, Shiva Shakti. But nobody seems to notice that Shiva's dancing on the back of a hunched up body, which is the ego that's been destroyed. So once you destroy the ego, you're liberated. So initially you
Yeah.
go, oh, I got this roller coaster. Wow, it's great. And then eventually that ego is going to start to be destroyed by Pluto. We think of things like Pluto as the imagery of alchemy, turning lead to gold, or the phoenix coming out of the ashes. So it's death and resurrection, or it's death and rebirth. I like that, prefer that to rebirth, to born and die, die and you born, reborn. So it's a very dynamic, powerful planet. As I said, you have it square the moon. So you're going to also part of your mission, how to help other people from the darkness into the light. Okay, because you
Yeah.
experience the darkness, you have a personal experience with it. Okay, and it
Yeah.
becomes your karma then to resolve it within yourself in terms of early trauma, and then be able to share that with others and help them from a traumatic memories or past. Not an easy guy to hang out with.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have the sun exactly opposing Pluto exactly by degree.
Yeah.
And when I went to Iceland, and I went to Iceland a couple years ago on an eclipse on my sun, there was an eclipse on my sun when I was there. And it was a total death of the ego when I was in Iceland. And I came back home a completely different person with like
Yeah.
new goals, stepping into service more, letting go of old childhood beliefs, things that I learned as a kid. It was
Yes.
just profound. What a profound experience that was.
Yeah. So it serves you well, but you had to go through hell. In my experience so far, now I've been doing this with the new idea of measurements for 25 years, or 26 years now, I guess, 1995, right? But about 1993 or 4, I got introduced to Feng Shui, not just as an idea, but as a training. I took a training, right? Interesting enough, it was my my astrology protege in the 80s, who had helped get set up in astrology and tarot card reader and so forth. That somewhere in 88 or 89 said, I'm going off to Feng Shui school. And I said, Feng Shui, what's that? Feng what? Okay. I'd never heard of this before. And I was pretty familiar with a lot of other Chinese metaphysics like the I Ching. The astrology is your star karma. That you can't change, just like you're not going to get taller or shorter in your DNA, right? So you have your karma for relationships, and especially my Feng Shui clients, a lot of them say, where can I go to make a lot of money? Yeah? And I go, wrong question. The right question is, where can I go to live comfortably, whether I have the karma for a lot of money or not? Okay? And that's where the second kind of Feng Shui karma is your earth karma. And your earth karma is what Feng Shui can balance out for you. My chart, as I think I told you last time jokingly, I have no money in my chart, basically, other than Venus maybe in the 11th house, good friends. I can always depend on a good friend. Do you owe me $500? Sure. Okay.
Aw.
And I know that I'm going to be doing a psychic fair or something, and I'll be able to pay him back soon. Okay. Bueno. Wonderful. Okay. But your earth karma, once he taught that class, I was able to patch the holes in my bucket. There was all these different things that I was unaware of that was letting me leak money all over the place. And the same thing with relationships. Wherever you go, you still have to work out your relationship issues. But on a Venus line or a Jupiter line or Jupiter, Venus, and the Sun line, you're more likely to work it out in a harmonious way. People still get divorced on Venus. It worked out harmoniously. The big mistake that many astrologers make, even though they're very good astrologers at reading birth charts or transits, but looking at maps, they often under evaluate the orb of influence, as we discussed that. Some use astro.com, which is only 125 miles. Some use have only know about it from the Jim Lewis manual that came with their map if they ordered it online. And that manual only said 250 miles. They don't know that Jim Lewis, a few years later, revised his expectation, said it's far too conservative. You should consider up to 600, 750 miles, yeah? To either side of the line, which is enormous, large, yeah? At least 500 miles. But consider, that's the key word, consider up to 700 miles because it's a, the orb blends out. It gets negligible. Maybe at some point it's non-existent. The only way to know where the edge is to walk or drive across it, as we talked about it. Okay, so that's one major mistake, using the measurements that are inadequate. Okay, this has led to a lot of people to make the decision that astrocartography maps are inadequate. One astrologer on his promo material says they found it was lackadaisical in the results. In other words, presuming that the relocated natal chart may provide more accurate information simply because it has houses and aspects and all these combinations of the original planetary pattern, but now rearranged to bring more benefit. Okay? And there's two major flaws with that problem, or maybe three. One flaw is not realizing that although they are perhaps putting Saturn or Pluto, to use the two examples that are usually the most difficult. I say usually because they both any planet has a positive side to it, but those usually end up being pretty nasty places to live. Um, and they may put it within 8 degrees, which is about 700 miles to either side of a angle, either the ascendant, the midheaven, the descendant, or the Imam Celi, which is the IC, which in Latin is the bottom of the heavens, right? The fourth house cusp of a birth chart or a relocated natal chart. So if it's within 8 degrees, which is what Jim Lewis said, equaled about 700, 750 miles, um, then that individual, although they may be going to a relocated natal chart that's spot on, maybe because no chart is ever going to be perfect, but it might be more perfect than a lot of other choices. But when you compare it to an astrocartography map, Saturn may be going right through that location or Pluto. Okay? And so that's a inadvertent mistake because many times uh, relocated natal chart will match up to an astrocartography map, either by putting Venus close to a midheaven or one of the other angles, or Jupiter or Mercury or the Sun, or some combination that plays well together, on two different angles, but they blend well when we look at an astrocartography map. Okay, and maybe who knows what the percentage might be of accuracy, but even if it's 99%, that means 1% of the people you're doing a consultation for with a relocated natal chart may end up in a location that actually has Mars and Uranus within 700 miles of that location. And Mars, Uranus, or Mars and Neptune, or Uranus and the moon, or the moon and Neptune, they don't play well together. They can end up being pretty challenging places, besides Saturn in combination or Pluto in combination with Mars, the Sun, um, and Venus, or the Moon, the personal planets. And that can have its negative results, unfavorable results with health issues that are aggravated early in life instead of when we get older in our 80s or 75s and so forth. Life happens. Um, at some age, life starts to diminish as I move into my 80s. Um, or it may attract a relationship that reflects that chaos or that dysfunctional energy that we might associate with two planets that don't play well together, like Neptune and the Moon, or, as I said, Saturn and Mars, or Mars and Uranus. Um, so yes, you can usually look at a birth chart. If the person's still living in their natal location, you can pretty much look at the birth chart, see what's within 8 degrees of any of the angles, and you already know what their influences are for their birth location. And if they do move to another place and you do a relocated natal chart for that new location, as long as you don't have planets within 8 degrees of the four angles that don't work well together or tend to be unfavorable, um, you're going to be sending a person to a very difficult lifestyle, especially health and relationship. Finances, a lot of my Feng Shui people, as I think I mentioned, ask me, where can I go to make a lot of money? And I say, it's a wrong question. Where can I go to live comfortably, whether I make a lot of money or not? Because making a lot of money or not is karma. You either have that birth chart, you might say combination that is a millionaire or a billionaire, or just someone who lives a nice, wealthy lifestyle. Okay. Um, as I joke, my chart shows no money at all. You never know how things are going to work out. To me, life is a gamble in that regard. But if you live on a Venus line, as I have for years, you do tend to live life artfully and find ways to live comfortably. Okay. Whether when I lived on a bamboo platform in a guava forest in Maui with a great ocean view and an outdoor kitchen, or as I say now, living with a very nice home that I own down here in Mexico. Okay, so but as I say, even if it's only 1%, since 1995, when I took the certification course and found out the correct measurements or to consider the correct measurements. Since then, I've been averaging probably over 100 maps a year. That's 30 years ago. So if I did 3,000 plus maps by now, over the years, that would be at least 30 people that I sent to a very undesirable location. Okay, so that's a big responsibility, even if it's only 1% of mistake per 100. I'll do it as a secondary technique, and always after I do the map, then I want to look at things like what you do, which is the actual locality, perhaps the geodetic, or we could also look at the relocated natal chart to see what things are going to be like in that location, okay? Using houses and aspects and so forth. But ultimately, you take yourself with you wherever you go. Your DNA isn't going to change you, how tall you are or how short you are. So wherever you go, you take yourself with you, which means you take your chart pattern. So if you have Pluto square Venus or Mars, which very likely is a traumatic childhood, then you still have to do your trauma work and come to what follow the Tibetan Buddhists, soul retrieval, or Byron Katie's book, Loving What Is, and her technique of asking four questions to turn around whatever it is that's obsessing you or haunting you. Likewise, health issues. You may have pre a precondition, you might say, as I do. For example, it's Saturn conjunct my ascendant, which is why I look like Saturn. Within, let's say, ascendant is 4 degrees, Saturn's 10 degrees, that's 6 degrees difference. So if I went to astrology, they'd probably say, how's your bones, your joints, your teeth, your skin? Well, when I grew up on the Saturn line, because it was on my ascendant in my natal city of birth, yeah, I had a lot of those problems. Slight curvature of the spine, cavities, multiple cavities every year, bad skin until I was 22, until I left the Saturn line, um, and on and on. And then finally, when I lived on Venus, skin cleared up, not looking too bad. The relocated natal chart, I would say, is a secondary technique. And as I was saying, if people just use their computer mapping module, don't know about Mundo. In fact, when I got my first computer program, I didn't know about Mundo either. And I called up the company. I said, how come Pluto's in the wrong location or doesn't match up with the maps I get from Jim Lewis or from the astrocartography? And he said, well, did you click on the In Mundo option? I never heard of that before. And what it is that Pluto is at a 16-degree angle to the elliptic of all the other orbits. So when you're looking out at a birth chart, you're looking out against the backdrop of the zodiac. Pluto is going to be in a zodiac sign. Okay? And that's why we don't select zodiacal on the maps. We select in Mundo because when you're looking down on planet Earth, Pluto is going to be in a different place than the zodiac. So Mundo is very crucial whether if you're using a mapping module. So I think those are the major considerations in first doing an astrocartography map first. Make sure you got that correct and you understand the measurements. Do the measurements on programs like astro.com. And I think I didn't check this out, but I think I'm understanding that Astro, what is it called? Seek.com also doesn't use Mundo at all. So that's way off. At least Astro.com uses the official Jim Lewis style designed maps. They have the franchise, but why they consider only 125 miles. That does give a Paran reading for the location, but it's only exactly where the two lines are crossing for that exact degree, instead of giving it a consideration that it's likely going to be an influence for about a degree above or degree below. So those would be the major mistakes I think that we'll often find in people misusing the planets instead of seeing them as qualities of life, right? Mercury is playful and useful and yes, good at communication. So it might bring that part of your personality to the foreground where you are much more social or more glib, or if you're a writer, be involved in printing or writing or publishing or some form of communication. Oh, photography is a good one for Mercury also. I'm just looking down at my notes and going, yep, those are the three biggies. Measurements, understanding that the planets are qualities and not professions, or what you're going to do on that. They're qualities of life. And that's why Saturn, which is dry and contracted, um, doesn't really give a great quality of life. Might give discipline, it might give responsibility. John F. Kennedy lived on Saturn his whole life, the former president of the United States. And, stern father. He was depressed, suffered from depression. He was on 16 medications. He almost died 5 times. Saturn, pretty heavy to live on that. Plus, he had a bad back, both in high school and in the war. But he wrote 2 bestsellers. He became a senator and the president of the United States, the most powerful guy in the world. You got to look at each planet on a spectrum. A planet like Venus, yes, it's about love and romance, but I think of it more as living life creatively. In other words, we like to call Venus the goddess of love, art, and beauty. So obviously, it didn't make me beautiful. Art, well, I certainly explored the arts, and now I do what I feel is an art, an ancient art, astrology. But before this, I was an artisan. And the other part was living art is that if you're not an artist, then you live life artfully. And artfully means creatively. And you could take certain risks and maybe have disappointments, but You don't have to feel so Saturn-like that you have to get a 9 to 5 job, stick with what you're supposed to be, a doctor, engineer, or a lawyer, or a nurse, or whatever your parents thought you should be, yeah, or society thought you should be. So Venus allows for much more freedom, right? But yes, the word venereal disease comes from the word Venus. So, if you're overindulgent, okay, you run a risk of health issues that have to do with Venus, such as gout, for example, too much sugar, or diabetes. Um, or Jupiter might be abundance and comfort and good social connections and a joyful life. But if you're an alcoholic, you're probably going to be excessive, you know.
Mm.
But compared to an alcoholic on Saturn, instead of maudlin and crying in your beer, on Jupiter, you might be a happy drunk, having a good time. It's still a problem, but it's
Yeah.
a quality of life, right? So that's really where I look at the planets. Mercury is youthful, right? Wings on the helmet, wings on the feet, right? But that doesn't mean you won't be youthful on Venus. But on Saturn, you won't feel very youthful as you get older. And this is where, of course, I'm concerned for anyone living on Saturn, is that after several years, Saturn could affect the bones, the joints, the teeth, right? All of which affected me before I left Saturn. Bad skin. But as soon as I got to California, I learned about herbs and food are your best medicine, and went on a detox diet when I was 24, and my skin cleared up in 5 days.
Wow.
My skin is probably better now than it was from all through my 20s, and so forth. I had curvature of the spine growing up on Saturn, slight curvature, fortunately not major, but when I was living on my Jupiter line, it took the guy 2 years, but he straightened my spine out. Okay? He also taught me pendulums, homeopathy, Bach flower remedies, and five element theory, Chinese five element theory, and I went to his class every Friday religiously.
Are there any places in the world that you've been to, traveling wise, that you've really loved? Like lines that you've been to just for fun, places that you've had any stories, things happen to you on certain lines when you've just visited them?
I was invited to teach Feng Shui in Sweden twice.
I was just looking at your map. You have Sun, Uranus, and Jupiter in Sweden.
Yeah, and probably going down through Italy too, and France.
Yeah.
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 What about the UK? I forget what I had in the UK, but that's where that my video comes from, the giving a feng shui lecture on astrocartography to the London Feng Shui Society in
That's
2000.
incredible. And it's interesting, you just mentioned about London. You had, the conference in London that you spoke at. You have a Mercury midheaven line there, which is all about being known for your speaking, your writing, speaking on stage, giving a conference. That's literally the Mercury MC line. But also you have a Jupiter Uranus Paran there within Orb of London as well. So I thought that was very innovative, talking about, new ideas, innovative ideas. So very, very cool to see that on your map.
What do I have in Singapore? Because I was invited to talk there at a feng shui conference, and I just was
Ooh.
just too far away. I just can't
Yeah.
feel like I.
Singapore, you have the Sun Uranus and it's setting. So it's about relationships and connecting with other people. So Sun Uranus type
Yeah,
people.
yeah,
And you also have the Moon IC, which is really nice for feeling, that sense of home, belonging, comfort, all that.
yeah, yeah. Yes, I
Yeah.
was invited to teach the astrocartography there by one of my feng shui colleagues.
Incredible. And one of the things I've noticed with people is they tend to follow the similar lines. So like if you have a big career opportunity coming up on your sun line, you'll have another one coming up on another sun line. So you have one in Stockholm, you have one in Singapore, right? Very interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Now, this is also true of people with strong Pluto conflicts in their birth chart. They may move many times to another variation of Pluto,
Mm.
maybe from the east to the west of Pluto, or to where it's Pluto and Moon crossing Paran. So people tend to repeat the pattern. And people who live on Pluto or Saturn for too long and go through too many disappointing relationships tend to then give up on relationships. Oh, I've had it. I'm not even interested anymore. I just want to go someplace, that more calm and peaceful for me. And then they move to a new location and they fall in love again. Also, with finances, feng shui. Because as I said,
Mm.
you can't change your star karma. You can only evolve by confronting your core issues and doing some inner work, soul retrieval, or Byron Katie's book, Loving What Is.
Love that book.
You're familiar with that one too. Good. Using Bach flowers to help support you in emotional balance and homeopathy, perhaps. But you can't change your Feng Shui, and that we call your earth karma. So once you
Mm.
locate where the hole in the bucket is, at least you can patch those up. So it may not be a wealthy chart, but at least you can have more benefit out of the whatever wealth is coming your way. Okay?
Yeah.
That's what changed
Wow.
the world back in 95 or 94 when I studied Feng Shui.
What's another misconception that you see with astrocartography
Well,
these days?
probably besides the obvious superficial ones, go to Venus to fall in love, Mercury to write a book, is if you have to choose. You can't do both. The other one is that there's a whole group of people or following of astrologers who've come to believe that a relocated natal chart, often abbreviated RNC, is more dynamic and more accurate and more valuable and more useful, etc., than the astrocartography map. And as I was saying before, when we were talking about astrolocality and geodetics and whatever, they're secondary influences. Right. So in other words, relocated natal chart, because you asked about it, would be one maybe to choose between, say, Italy or someplace in France. But the problem is, usually not always, because sometimes they match up perfectly, right? Because after all, what are we looking at, say, in a birth chart, and where a person's living when they're, if they, unless they move right away, but where they might have lived through their youth or early into life, is that all you have to do is look at a birth chart. What's within 8 degrees of the midheaven? What's within 8 degrees of the ascendant, mid, IC, and descendant? And you got their astrocartography right there. You don't have the
Yeah.
parans. You don't have the parans be overlapping. Where's your midheaven? Astrocartography map, relocated, right? Same thing. The problem is that sometimes relocated natal charters will be looking to put, say, Mars in, maybe they prefer the 10th house instead of the ninth house, whichever. Okay. And maybe Uranus they think is better placed maybe in the 6th house instead of the 7th. Okay. So it looks good on houses and aspects unless they're square. When you translate that to the astrocartography map, yes, you'll have Mars at the midheaven and Uranus on the descendant if it's within 8 degrees. So the person's now living on Mars and Uranus. So they don't play well together because Mars can be great for competitive sports and maybe litigation lawyers and soldiers and people who are Martians to start with. However, even people living on Mars for too many years often complain about headaches, head injuries, which is not unlikely. The other day I had a guy, I don't have headaches anymore. I used to. Now what I have is eczema on my skin. It's like fire. So he's still Mars burning up. Okay? Um, but the big issue often with people living on Mars too long is adrenal exhaustion. Because it's like they're busy, working, doing this, doing that, running around. A strategy for calm and peaceful, like maybe doing Tai Chi or doing meditation on a regular basis, Mars is going to be a burnout. Okay, so we combine that with Uranus. Now, Uranus on the spectrum, I was saying you have to look at planets on the spectrum. On the positive end of the spectrum, it's genius, it's innovation, it's inventiveness. It's the only planet that doesn't spin on its axis north and south. It goes east and west. It's the cuckoo planet. So if you combine Uranus with Mars, you get cuckoo and aggression. You combine Uranus, say, with Venus, it could be exciting, socially exciting, unique and unusual and exciting people. Maybe some bizarros. You're going to meet those people anyways throughout life. Neptune and the moon may end up on the cusps of one of the angles. Another negative combination. But the big one that's often missed, and that's where I usually get someone crying on my shoulder, I need a second opinion. This guy said, I had astrocartography done. And it turns out they did a relocated natal chart. I said, send me the map if you have it, the big one, and we can use that. Otherwise, I have to order one for you. No, he didn't give me a map. He read it off of the computer. Maybe they're looking at astro.com. Or they send me a relocated natal chart. Pluto may be in a favorable location, but because of what's called in Mundo, It's actual degrees of, how it's not exactly like all the other planets in a circle.
That's a great question I'd love to ask you. Mundo versus zodiacal. There's two options that you can use on SolarFire, all the different softwares. You can pull up the lines for zodiacal on the map or Mundo. I always use Mundo because I like the astrocartography way of doing things. A lot of my students in my program, they're big on asteroids. Like they'll use
Yeah,
Juno or Vesta, all these different asteroids. I don't use the asteroids. I briefly
yeah,
used Ceres, but I don't use the asteroids
yeah,
largely. And so when you put in asteroids onto the astrocartography map, onto the
yeah.
birth chart, etc., you'll get, if you put it in zodiacal versus a mundo, the asteroids move
All over the place.
dramatically
Yeah,
too.
because they're all they're not concentric circles like almost all the other planets are. Elliptical circles, because not concentric circles. Before Kepler, Ptolemy said, you know, it's like big bowls of each planet is within another bowl. So we're looking at and because of Mars retrograde phenomena, Kepler, who wanted to, as he wrote about it, I wanted to know the signature of God by looking at the signs and symbols in the sky, like it says in the Bible. So he saw that Mars retrograde can't be explained if they're all circles. But if you stretch it out, oh, elliptical. Now you have one train going this way, another train going that way, and one of them is going to look like it's going backwards.
And do you do astrocartography readings, by the way? Do you do consultations?
Oh, yeah. I'd say since 1995, I'd say probably a third of my consultations are based on referrals about astrocartography, or I give a lecture on it, like at the conferences, and these people.
Do you print out the maps for your clients or is it
No,
online that you
no,
do?
I always purchase the map from the only company that has the franchise. There used to be two. That's why I wrote in my book about the U.S. version, and I show it black lines, and and the color graphics were much more sedate. And then
Yeah.
Robert Curry, an astrologer up in England on the island of Man, he bought the franchise when the other guy got too old, and redesigned it with the graphics. With everything's in color.
Wow.
Color key down here. Go down the list and see what's XX or checks. And on the other side, it gives the legend. That's the original logo. Um, so you can order the maps. Anyone who did Feng Shui also did astrology. They always went hand in hand. Right? Now, what we call Chinese astrology actually has to do with 5 elements and nothing to do with stars. Although there is a kind of a form of astrology, but nobody I know does that. It's very esoteric and very, how should I say, imaginative. Um, not that it's not valuable in the hands of someone who knows what to do with it, but it's actually using 5 element theory. And with Feng Shui, there's actually several different approaches to Feng Shui. So just to be clear, my book is about what's called land form. It has to do with the structure of the house and bed positions, and it has to do with the house siding of the house, maybe the relationship of the bed to toilets or bathrooms, and other things that could be detrimental. And those are things that have to do with health or relationship or prosperity. And that's what your earth karma, you can change that. And then the third karma, of course, is your human karma, doing good deeds, right? Because as they say, your karma from the previous lifetime is what you got this lifetime. So what you do this lifetime is going to be what you get next lifetime. Love to share. And just a week or two before we talked, I was sitting out on my deck and looking out at the ocean and going, I'm going to be 80. It's time for me to share what's in this brain. There's so much information. Because we could talk about Kabbalah, we could talk about Hawaiian kahunas, we could talk about so much different stuff that all ties together, and the knowledge we need to elevate our clients, right? To give us the awareness, plus the difference between Jungian psychology and astrology and humanistic astrology and psychology. Lots of good stuff to know. Um, and it's all, to me, originally about my personal growth. And later I found out, hey, it could be a career. I got a typewriter and a business card. Well, my website definitely has, as I said, if you'd rather buy the book online, then they're going to charge you taxes and whatever. So you can just email me at my initials, at elliotanzer.com, ELLIOT TANZER.com. And if you go to my website, www.elliotanzer.com, you can view my video on the subject, uh, read about, I have a whole article archives, which gives many feng shui articles I've written, because I kind of segued away from astrology in 1990 something and started writing more about feng shui. But otherwise, you can also email me for the astrocartography book, and I'll mail that to you as well. Um, just depends on where you live as to what the postage is going to be. Yeah.
What an incredible episode with Elliot Jay Tanzer. You can find all of his information down below in the description in the show notes of this episode. Find his books on feng shui and evaluating astrocartography maps and learn from him. It was such a joy to speak with him, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of season 2 of Cosmic Compass. If you have any guests that you would like to come on the show, be sure to DM me on Instagram at Ms. Helena Woods. Send me any astrologers that you would like to have come on the show, and I will reach out to them. Also, if there are ever any podcasts that you think I should be on, definitely send me a DM there as well, and I'd be happy to reach out to them and see if they would like to collaborate. I'm definitely in a collaboration mood and spirit with my progressed moon in Libra. So let me know in the DMs on Instagram. I'll see you in the next one. Happy astro travels.